What's up, cats? A lot of the time, I hear the phrase, I don't even know where to begin with arranging, and I'm here to tell you it's easier than you think.
He said it! He said it!
All you have to do is come up with an intro based on the melody, score the melody in the beginning for tenor and trumpet, sax solely on the bridge, full band on the last day, solo section, shout section, repeat the melody, outro. Wait. If you want your chart to sound like this, that is. While this formula is tried and true, used in many charts we still play to this day, and seen in many an arranging assignment, in reality, how you approach every chart is going to be different, as every chart is going to have a different arc. While I don't want to tell you exactly what to do, as I think one of me is probably enough for any big band, I can give you some general guidelines based on my process for arranging. Follow these 7 easy steps and soon you'll be writing like Jim McNeely. What? No, I'm not even writing like Jim McNeely yet. Your first obstacle is the intro. This might honestly be the most important part of the chart, as both the listener and the musicians playing will generally decide if they like the chart or not based on the intro. There's a couple different ways you can approach writing it, which is mainly based on the type of chart you're writing. If it's a standard, it usually won't have a specific intro, in which case coming up with one falls on you. Common intros include pedals, the last 8 bars of the tune, or my personal favorite, using a fragment of the melody to set up the actual melody. There's also a very wide range in the dynamics of intros. Some might be a more gradual build into the melody, some might immediately step on the gas pedal, then come way down for dynamic contrast, and some might just stay at a consistent dynamic the entire time. Also, if you put in the work to get 13 horn players, please use at least some of them on the intro. If you just use the rhythm section, it might as well just be a combo chart. However, if the intro came free with the song, that makes this part a lot easier. You still shouldn't play the intro 1-1, as these slight modifications are what makes it an arrangement and not an orchestration, but having a clear figure to base it off of makes it much easier. Although if it's a song that has an intro that's usually played, but not officially part of the song, it might be cool to come up with your own intro, and then use this later in the song, like as an interlude for a soloist. But if it's officially part of the song, you should probably officially use it as part of the intro. The intro is also where you'll want to set up the main style of the arrangement. I really don't care for intros where you never hear that style again in the entire chart. It's like setting up a story about an office worker going about his daily life, and then 5 chapters in, he gets hit by a truck, and then is reincarnated in a new world as a Jollibes. Was the series about to get axed? Why are we here now? Also, just because it's a big band doesn't mean you have to change the style of the original. While you certainly can, and should, if it sounds good, you don't have to change the style of something to make it jazz to play with a big band. You might have to work a bit to figure out how to interpret it through the lens of a big band, but ultimately, if it sounds good, then it sounds good, jazz or not. Once you've figured out your intro, next is the melody. Intro into melody is usually the most unaltered part of the general big band formula. Sometimes there might be a solo before the intro, or the intro might be really long, with a lot of development, but the intro will pretty much always go into the melody. For the melody, this will generally start with lower intensity, and then build as it goes on. For the lower intensity, you'll want to voice this with instruments that sound good in the lower range, or can play in the upper range quietly. This makes trombone, tenor, soprano, and flugelhorn all ideal choices, as trombone can play quietly across their entire range, flugel sounds great in its lower register, soprano blends well with flugel, and tenor supports the higher instruments super well in its lower range. Doubles and mutes are also a good choice, but these come with more considerations. If your melody has a verse that repeats, you should do something different on the first verse from the second verse. The usual approach is to add a background here, although you can also vary the melody by leaving out comping instruments the first time, switching what instruments are playing the melody the second time, or even switching the drum groove. Not like a drastic switch, but in J-pop, usually the drums will play a more reserved groove in the first instance of the verse, and then go into the full groove on the repeat. You can also use this in swing, like if you were to use a closed hi-hat groove for the first day, and then go to the ride pattern on the second day. Especially for the melody at the beginning, you'll mostly want to stick to unison. Immediately starting out with a harmonized melody is a big jump in intensity, and it's hard to grow from there over the course of the entire melody. Think of it like a high jump competition where instead of jumping as high as you can, you have to jump to a specific point, but the goal is still having the highest jump possible. You'd want to start from the lowest point possible so your jump can score the most points, right? The more room you give your chart to grow, the more interesting it'll be. It's usually fine for backgrounds to be harmonized, even in early sections of the chart, but you'll want to make sure that these don't overtake the melody. So for these I would mainly stick to pads and stabs, as melodic phrases will confuse the listener. If this group is playing a melody in unison, and this group is playing a melody in harmony, it's pretty unclear which group you're supposed to be listening to. So you want to keep the focus on the main group by keeping the harmonized backgrounds more out of the way. As you get further into the melody and start building intensity, you'll probably want to switch these, having the melody be harmonized and then the backgrounds be unison. Having a harmonized background over a harmonized melody can be confusing, so if the melody is harmonized, it's best to keep the backgrounds in unison. One trick I really like using is saving harmonization for the chorus of the song, or for the last section if it's a standard. A harmonized melody is pretty standard for big band arrangements, so by delaying it all the way until the chorus, it makes it stand out a lot more. The intro and melody are pretty streamlined, but once you finish the melody, it's time for you to make a choice. From here, you have 3 paths your chart can take. There's a lot of factors that go into which of these 3 options to choose. When deciding which route to go down, the first thing I'll always consider is this quote by Bob Brookmeyer. Wait, that's not it, try again. You should only go to a solo once you have exhausted every other option. So essentially, after the melody, you keep putting development, or more melody, or interludes, or basically any way of writing something that doesn't involve soloing. This approach is the most ideal in charts where you want the development to be the main focus of the chart, rather than the melody. Whether the main focus of the chart is the development or melody is a very important distinction to make. Charts that focus on the melody will usually go right to the solo, or have a short interlude, then go to the solo. This is heard most often on arrangements of more well-known songs, like most of the arrangements the 8-bit big band releases. This is not to say that it's a bad approach. In fact, I take this approach a lot in the video game or VTuber arrangements I write. It's mainly about knowing the audience you're writing for. For example, let's say I'm writing an arrangement of Hagos Bills' song 818, the 6th song on her debut album Zodiac inspired by the snake on the Chinese Zodiac calendar released 840 days ago on March 1st, 2024. Despite how much I show my favorite streamer who I like a normal amount, chances are you haven't heard this song. Now let's say I did an absolutely crazy reharm of it. Who is this for? Jazz musicians aren't going to want to check it out because the reharm isn't as interesting without the basis of knowing the original song. And brats probably won't like it either as it's too far removed from the original. So your target audience is jazz musicians who have also listened to Zodiac, which as far as I know it's literally just me. There's definitely a whole debate to be had about making music that suits the listener versus making music that suits the player, but this is this and that is that. So for charts where the melody is the focus, I like to reinterpret Bob Brookmeyer's quote from earlier. Instead of exhausting every possible option before going into the solo, I'd like to create a section where there can't be anything but a solo. For example, here's part of my arrangement of Hoshimachi Suisei's song Bibby Dibba. What else could I possibly put here that would work besides a solo? The only thing I can think of is a sax solo, but honestly I think that would sound kind of corny. And then what do we do when the band starts playing the melody as written again? It would just sound weird, and the piano solo sounds a lot better than anything I could come up with. Interludes are how you can still sneak in development while writing a mainly melody-focused chart. By basing the interlude on what the audience already knows, it gives them the development in an easily digestible fashion, and still sounds great while doing it. For example, in this interlude in Bibby Dibba, it's almost entirely based around the main motif of the song, but I alter it in a lot of different ways, such as lengthening the motif, placing the motif in different harmonic contexts, and splitting the motif between sections to create a call and response. Interludes are great for making the chart yours while still focusing on the melody. But if you're writing an arrangement that isn't as focused on the melody, then I would highly recommend listening to Bob Brookmeyer. The longer you can spend developing a chart before the solo, the greater the payoff will be when you get there. I'll be going into all the ways you can delay a solo in much more detail in my next video, but the short version is that you want to develop everything as much as possible, and the best way for it to still be connected to the rest of the chart is by basing your development off of other aspects of the chart, whether through methods like augmentation, diminution, ensemble passages, or interludes. Interludes don't have to only be at the end of the form, by the way. You can put them wherever you want, and then, once you put enough of these in that you think the listener might start to get tired of them, that's when you introduce the soloist. For the solo section, one of my biggest pet peeves as a writer is when a chart will just have like 6 or 5 soloists on the same section with no changes. At that point you might as well just throw on a combo record. Even 2 soloists in the exact same section can drag on, based on the length of the form. At least for my charts, I find that a lot of the time one soloist is all I need, as adding a second would interrupt the flow of the chart. For writing backgrounds, one of my favorite devices is recontextualizing parts of the melody. For example, If I'm writing backgrounds over Stellar by Starlight, I might quote the beginning of the melody over all the chords in the B section. Or for All the Things You Are, taking that fourth the melody begins with and moving it around the various key centers. The backgrounds are mainly there to force the soloist to follow the arc you want to create. For example, if the solo section is followed by a shout section, it would sound really weird if the soloist just keeps the solo at a really low intensity the entire time, with a sudden big jump in intensity once we get to the solo section. While the soloist and rhythm section can add enough intensity on their own for a good transition to the shout section, it's better to make sure that they must rather than they can. If the band is playing really intense backgrounds, then a good rhythm section will naturally match the energy of these backgrounds, allowing you to skip the conversation where you have to tell them to build to the end of the solo section. That being said, you do want to make sure backgrounds stay in the background. When I was just starting out, I had a really bad problem with writing overly active backgrounds, to the point the listener wasn't really sure what they were supposed to be listening to. While the band adds a lot of intensity, the main driver is this instrument. The band doesn't need to be doing all this to drive the soloist. Backgrounds like this work just fine. I found that generally you want to keep the amount of eighth notes in the background to about 4 per phrase, as this creates motion without distracting too much from the soloist. Yes, with modern technology you can make sure the soloist is heard over the band, but the audience will still have a hard time knowing what they're supposed to focus on. Another approach I like taking to backgrounds is making sure that no phrase is the same, backgrounds-wise. For example, if the soloist is in AABA form, the first A only contains a dovetail for the soloist, then the next A contains no horns at all. The B section is new, so it doesn't need backgrounds, but then the last A, being a repeat, needs backgrounds. Then, if you repeat the form again, every section will need backgrounds, but with different instrumentations. I also like giving the soloist 4 bars of no backgrounds right before the end of the solo, as it makes sure the soloist is heard before the band goes into what will probably be the biggest backgrounds of the chart. After the solo section, you then have the chance for more development, although once again this is decided by the type of chart you're writing. Probably inspired by how much J-pop I listen to, I really like doing a breakdown after the solo section, which then builds into a final repeat of the melody or shout chorus. This breakdown gives the audience a bit of a break from the intensity of the previous section, and makes the next section seem more intense due to the contrast. If the chart keeps going like this, the audience won't perceive the intensity of the new section as much as if you were to do this. You can think of the breakdown as a sort of palate cleanser before getting to the next section. If you do write a shout section, my favorite approach for this is harmonized brass and unison saxes, with saxes playing counter melodies to the brass figures, or just having lead trumpet play really high, although sometimes these are kinda just the same thing. The outro should be based on everything that came before it, like a summary of the chart. If I wrote an interlude, I really like using the interlude for the outro, and having the earlier soloist solo on it again, but then with different orchestration in the horns. Or maybe have the horns play a line over the interlude figure to distinguish it from the solo. If the entire tune uses a vamp, maybe vamp the fade instead. Another outro I'm a big fan of is having the band suddenly drop out, drum solo, and then final chord. If you can't decide, I would just try throwing different endings at the wall and seeing if something sticks. Overall, if you watch this video and still don't know where to start, just try to write something. It might not be that good, and that's okay. The first big band chart I ever wrote was awful. I put an optional double C in a chart that I was intending to have played by high schoolers. My second chart was certainly better, but I wouldn't ever put that one in front of other people either. There's an analogy about a professor who split his class into 2 groups. One class was tasked with making as many pots as possible, while the other class was tasked with making one pot as good as possible. At the end of the semester, who do you think had the better pot? While you might think it was the group that focused on making one pot as good as possible, it was actually the other group. By making so many, they learned a lot of ways not to make a pot, and how to apply this to future pots they made. While the other group might have a really good pot, the next pot probably won't be as good, and they won't be able to make it nearly as fast as the other group either. So just write an arrangement. Who cares if it's not that good? Bob Brookmeyer isn't going to come down from the heavens and smite you because you gave saxophones the melody for the entire chart and ignored the brass except for the shout section. Just write it, try to figure out what you can do better on the next one, and keep going. And if you want help figuring out what you can do better on the next one, I actually teach arranging lessons for just